We added our recipe model, now let's use it. So back to the recipe list component, here I added my recipes array, and now that we created the model, we can also define the type for this. So we can add colon to inform TypeScript that now we will define the type for this property. And the type will be recipe, so that will use our own model. And not just recipe, but an array of recipes, which is indicated by adding squared brackets after it. So now TypeScript knows the only thing which will ever get stored in this recipes property is an array which holds a couple of recipe objects, or also no such objects, that would be a possibility too, but certainly not a couple of strings or numbers, but objects like this, like defined in our model. Now, to inform TypeScript where this type is coming from, we need to add an import. So I'll import recipe. That is what we named it in here, right? That's our class name. So that's what we have to specify between the curly braces here. And now we have to move up one folder. Since we're in the recipe list folder right now, we have to go to the recipes folder because that is where our recipe model lives. So now I navigated up one folder, just like with the cd command in your terminal. And then it's in the recipe model file, again without the file extension. So with that, we can now use this model, and now we can manage our array of recipes here. And let's start with one recipe, one dummy recipe. So in this array, I will create a new recipe, and I can use the new keyword to create a new object based on this recipe blueprint, based on our class. And now when executing this like a method, we're actually calling the constructor. So now here, we need to pass the arguments we're expecting in this constructor. So name, description, and image path. Now you may choose any data you want here. I'll name this a test recipe. So that will be the title, the name of the recipe. Then the description, this is simply a test maybe. And the image path, now as I said, I'm going to use images from the web here. So we're going to use a URL. Now let's simply search for an image, and I will search for recipe. Let's use Google image search. I also want to make sure that I may use whatever I find here. So let's find a recipe, maybe this one here. Let's see if we take this. And deep linking like this, of course, should be done in a real app. This is just for testing this. So if we take this image here and paste the path in here as a string, now we should be able to use this later on once we output this. So with that, we are using our own model. We're using it here in the recipe list component. Of course, we won't be able to see anything for now. So to see that, we should actually do something in the template of the recipe list component. Here, I'm right now only outputting my recipe item, and I want to loop through all these items and use them to display my recipes. For now, what I will do is I will add a bootstrap row first of all, like that. And in that row, I want to add a column with the class colXS12 to have it span over the full width. And here, I will later add a button, or I will add the button right now, but I will later add the functionality to create a new recipe. So here, I'll simply set up a button with the classes button and then button success, where I say new recipe, like this. Now again, this will be hooked up later. So I'll add another row below this, which should now actually hold my list of recipes. Here I'll again use colXS12 to have to span over the full width. And keep in mind, this will already be nested inside of this MD5 column, so it's only that wide to begin with. But inside this column, I want it to span over the full width. And now here we will later output my recipe items. For now though, let's put the code we will later put into app recipe item into this component here directly. Because right now we will have no way of getting our recipe data down to the recipe item. So that is something I will actually do after the next section once we learned this. But so that we're able to see something, I will add the code for a single recipe item here into the recipe list directly. A single recipe item should be clickable. So it's going to be an anchor tag, because later once we click it, we want to select it. And here I will then actually assign another class which will be list group item to make it look like a list group item in Bootstrap. Also add clearfix, otherwise it will probably look wrong. And then I'll add a div which will receive the class pull left, since I want to have this on the left of this list item. In there, of h4 tag maybe with the recipe name. This should receive the class list group item heading. Again, these are all Bootstrap classes I'm using here. And there I will later output the name of the recipe, so recipe name for now. We will soon replace this with dynamic content. Below this, I want to have a paragraph with a class of list group item text. And here we will have the description of the recipe. And on the other side, I'll add a span with a class of pull right. In the span, I want to output my image. So here, what I'll do is I'll add a class image responsive so that Bootstrap will resize this image automatically for me. And again, all that content will go into the app recipe item component after the next course section. One more thing I want to set on the image though, I want to add my own style. I'll simply add an inline style here to set the maximum height of that item to 50 pixels so that we can't go above that, and Bootstrap will handle the rest and resize the image appropriately. So that's my setup for a single item. Of course, feel free to fine-tune this to your needs. Now with that, the goal is to replicate this item. Again, we will later put it into its own component and then fill these spaces here with dynamic data. This is your challenge. We got a recipe list component with our recipes array. The array only holds one item for now. You, of course, are free to add more. But even with that one item, you should be able to replicate this part here as often as needed to create one section of this code for each item in this recipe array, and then fill name, description, and the source attribute here, property, with the right values for this recipe. I will do this in the next lecture, but definitely try doing this on your own first.